Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 7th of April 2016, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We're also joined by four guests. They will be in the background listening and watching and hopefully paying attention to the news today. Well, the weather's mixed and variable. Hampshire is raining. We've got cold and windy in Somerset, very in fact. Northern Ireland is as usual, which is cold grey with a hint of rain. Manchester sunny, Plymouth is grey, Norfolk is April showers, so pretty mixed across the country. But we expect the European Union to produce a more uniform weather in due course. Yeah. Well, we'll lead off with important items, and that must be dogs, because the local Plymouth paper, the Plymouth Herald, has this front page. Showing a dog being chipped and saying that dog owners must now be getting their pets chipped in accordance with the law. But interesting to see that the new laws that are coming into force of dog owners, non-EU workers, pensioners, savers and taxpayers. What's not clear from the Herald article is whether all of those various people are going to be chipped at the same time as their dogs. We're not joking about this subject, and we'd just like to say if the Evening Herald was reporting the chipping of animals on the 6th of April, that should be 2016, of course, apologies for that. The UK column was reporting in February 2015, so let's have a look at what we had to say. Here it is. We were pointing out that we believe the next step is that dogs are not microchipped will be called for humane destruction. And I think the following step, Mike, is going to be dogs followed by children.
Indeed. We'll come on to that later. But before we get there, let's talk about the ICIJ, because they continue to try to ramp up public angst over the dirty dealings of those dirty Russian and Chinese leaders, as they would say it, presumably with a view to regime change. But as we pointed out on Monday, when you actually look at what they're pushing, you find Britain's dirty hands all over it. And let's not forget that Hong Kong still retains a lot of the British oligarchical infrastructure. It was Hong Kong a year or two ago, if you remember, that was where the Colour Revolution was. They were attempting to start that. That's where that was focused. And others are now beginning to mention the British angle of this as well. France 24 here. And as the I newspaper points out, of course, HMRC is right in the centre of it, but let's not forget that people have been talking about that for many years. So I think Richard Brooks published this book in 2012. So none of this is new information. Now, King David, of course, is doing some squirming, as is George Osborne. Both are denying that they have any shares in any offshore companies. And Osborne demands that everything he needs to declare is in the Register of Public Interests. Do we believe him?
No.
No. And Cameron is coming under pressure because it's come to light that he had been arguing 2 or 3 years ago against the EU setting up a central register of beneficiary company ownership. And he had written to Van Rompuy at the time saying, as we clamp down on the misuse of companies, we must take care not to displace illicit activity elsewhere. This means that the solution for addressing the potential misuse of companies, such as central public registers, may well not be appropriate generally. So he seems to be changing his tune, perhaps. But right at the centre of this, as we mentioned on Monday, is the attempt to usher in a global tax regime. And of course, this is right at the heart of the global governance agenda. The establishment in the West, at least, is desperate to get some key infrastructure in place before the financial system collapses. They don't have too much time to do it, and we're sort of seeing these desperate false flag operations and trying to get this kind of infrastructure in place. And I think the public's reaction to this, which has been generally, first of all, so what, because they've heard it all before, but the public's reaction has not been what the establishment would have liked to have seen. And I think if we just give this a general good ignoring, we're going to see an even more extreme reaction from them, another similar type of experiment in the not too distant future with more desperation, perhaps.
Interesting to see that the speed this has come out across the internet. And this morning somebody pointed me to Russia Today, which had a very detailed article covering all of the ground about who released it, who the media organisations were, who the funders, so all the things that we were reporting 2 days ago, now coming out in Russia today. And of course, a big finger pointed once again at George Soros and all of his activities, which I think is quite interesting. So the Russians are definitely not letting go of George Soros. They banned his organisations in Russia, and now they're pointing at his hand behind this release of 2.6 terabytes of information. Yeah. So interesting to see that other news organisations picking up. They are not convinced by what's been saying. But hasn't it been wonderful to actually see David Cameron stammering when he's asked, well, you're actually involved with all of this. I think that's been really enjoyable viewing. And just for our listeners, one of those headlines that we showed, if I saw it correctly myself, was that one of the main headquarters of HMRC is...
It's rented from one of these offshore tax dodging companies.
But presumably HMRC didn't know that, Mike.
Well, as the book from that we showed there highlighted, that was 2012. That book was published, and people have known about this for quite a long time. And I remember a documentary a couple of years ago where they were showing the activities of HMRC in Jersey in particular, and the kind of
deals
that HMRC themselves were doing with corporations involving offshore companies. So this is not new information, and that's why it's a bit pathetic that they're trying to ramp it up at this particular time, because people have known about this for a very long time.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the unhappy state of the steel industry. And of course, Tata Steel is still very much in the news. Thank you very much to one of our viewers who sent an email saying, I think you should have a look at BBC Newsbeat. So here is the article. Encourage people to go and read it because it is literally so long and so appalling. The headline is Steel versus Banks, why they're different when it comes to a government bailout. And this is massive propaganda. I'm just going to put in the little inset there, which is the BBC saying, what is the European Union? Trust us, the BBC. We're going to tell you what the European Union is. And that was a little active insert on this article. So why were we interested in this particular story? Well, let's have a look at the man who wrote it. Here he is from his Twitter page, Jay Coburn. I thought writing on your knuckles was part of the thugs in most cities, but whether that's true or not, I don't know. But this young man wrote the article, and on his tweet page, you can probably just see it on screen. I'll just highlight it. But he says, it took me an awfully long time to write this article. It obviously challenged him a bit. I don't know why, because most of it is sheer propaganda simply clagged together. And if we want to have a look at some of it, we best start off with this. During the financial crisis, UK unemployment peaked at 2.7 million, a little over 8% of the total workforce. If the UK hadn't bailed out the banks, it's likely that figure would have been even bigger, costing the government huge amounts of money in benefits and lost tax revenue. So this young man, Mike, thinks that we had to bail out the banks because otherwise we'd have lost thousands of jobs and the country would have fallen apart. Shall I carry on? It's good fun. The UK has a workforce of around 31 million, 40,000, and what he's talking about now is steel. 40,000 is just 0.12% of that workforce. When Port Talbot Steelworks is thought to be losing around 1 million a day, the government may find that number a little more palatable. So here's the BBC simply suggesting, don't bother about the people in South Wales, let's sack them all, let's give the money to the banks because, well, it's the common sense thing to do.
And it's only 0.1% anyway, who cares about them?
Yeah, who cares? So Mr. Coburn, don't know what he earns, but clearly the BBC could save money by not paying him. But let's follow it through. It says the government can't legally buy the steel plants themselves. And the reason for this is that we're in the EU. So according to Mr. Coburn, by law, EU member states cannot rescue failing companies in the steel sector. We're not allowed, apparently, this young man says. And if we get to the bottom, and this is just incredible, it says, but the EU has decided that allowing failing steel companies to go bust is good for the union as a whole. So what's your take on that, Mike?
2 words, Lima Declaration.
Carry on.
Well, type in Lima Declaration into the search box on the UK Column website. You get an article about it. It's about the transfer of manufacturing industry from the west to the east. All you need to know, UN policy.
So quite nicely with policy, major industry, in this case steel, stripped out of the UK as we move on to proper jobs.
UN policy implemented through the EU.
Okay, well, if steel is going, don't worry because proper jobs are coming in. Let us show you an advert for proper jobs. And again, thank you very much to a viewer who sent this to me. So it's a lady, Deborah Oliveira. She's advertising on her Twitter page, and it's for the nice Polish name here, the Maria Skłodowska-Curie ITN early stage researcher post. Sorry, that's what she's offering in dementia care and technology. Well, what is all that? You go and have a look, and it brings you into a very interesting European research organisation.
More upstretched hands there, I see.
More upstretched hands, ready for the arrival of the beast. And it says, welcome, INDUCT stands for Interdisciplinary Network for Dementia Using Current Technology. So don't worry, because INDUCT is aimed at developing a multidisciplinary, intersectional education research framework for the EU. You with me so far, Mike?
Yep.
And that is going to improve technology and care for people with dementia and provide the evidence to show how technology can improve the lives of people with dementia with the following objectives.
Well, this was actually written by somebody with dementia, was it?
Well, one might assume so, but let's see what the number one objective was. And here it is, should come in. Hopefully, here we are. Is to set up INDUCT, the European Multidisciplinary Intersectional Education Research Network. So their first priority is money for themselves. And if we're to trust these people, they're going to use technology to help care for us. I don't think so.
Well, EU referendum, and of course the big news on the EU referendum is the government's new leaflet. So starting next week, every household in the country will receive a leaflet from the government setting out why it believes that remaining in the EU is the best decision for the UK. Apparently 85% of the public wants the government to provide them with more information to help make an informed decision. Do you need the government to do that for you, Brian?
To make an informed decision, you need to get rid of the government, Mike.
Yes, quite possibly. So the total cost of producing, distributing and publicising this leaflet is £9.3 million. £9.3 million. So let's just put that in a bit of perspective. Here we've got the funding for the EU referendum PSYOP, and the government is spending £9.3 million. Of course, the Electoral Commission will soon distribute £7 million to each of the two campaigns, the Remain campaign and the Leave campaign. So what does that mean? That means that the Remain campaign gets a total of £16.3 million and the Leave campaign gets £7 million. So that is a fair referendum.
Fair, impartial.
Fair and impartial referendum. And now the Electoral Commission, of course, is going to announce by the 14th of April who will be the official Leave campaign and who will get that pot of money. The other Leave campaigns don't get to sort of dip their mitts into that money, apparently. But anyway, Liz Truss, she had this to say: the referendum will be a huge decision for our country, and it's crucial that the public have clear and accessible information. Independent polling carried out on behalf of the government made it clear. So independent polling carried out on behalf of the government. How's that independent?
Well, they'll have used a government-selected independent company,
and they'll
Mike.
have paid for it.
Yes.
So it's independent?
Yes.
Yes, good. Independent polling carried out on behalf of the government made it clear that 85% of people wanted more information from the government to help them make an informed decision. So, you know, I am happy with what's going on here because
it's fair and independent.
It's fair and independent, yeah.
Well, of course, it's nothing of the sort. The government carries on lying. The objective is to lock us into the European Union. And one of the most dangerous things which UK Column has been highlighting, of course, is that while the public are given games to play with behind the scenes, very serious events are taking place to lock us into the European Union. One of the key elements of this is the creation of the EU military force. And our prediction is that even if there's a vote to leave Europe, the government is going to be working behind people's backs to cement the rest of this deal. Now, it was the UK Column in 2011 that warned of the secret meetings that had been taking place with the French. These allowed David Cameron to suddenly announce a 50-year defence pact with the French, not debated in Parliament, but was only debated or discussed behind closed doors in such places as the ambassador's residence in Paris. So we have a political charity, the Franco-British Council, making major decisions on defence. Well, the next step has been that Mr. Trump has kindly given us a really significant flag that this is exactly what is planned. And so a few days ago, Mr. Trump was saying that NATO was obsolete. It needed to be readjusted in order to tackle terrorism. Countries that weren't pulling their weight should be thrown out. And what he was doing really was giving the stepping stone to that new EU military structure. I'll just add this one in because he hasn't said it once. He's saying it again very strongly in America that in his view, NATO is obsolete and there's got to be major changes to enable it to do its future role. So this was sent to me this morning. This is the new logo that's being used to promote the European Security and Defence Programme. And of course, what the individual had picked up was that the NATO flag has been put alongside the EU flag and gently buried into the background. So we are very, very confident now that the plan is that Britain's armed forces are to be rapidly subsumed into an EU military structure. At the same time, the NATO structure will be collapsed, and then we're going to be left with an EU military system reinforced by its own treasury system. Well, if that's the organisational structure, what's coming next? Well, of course, the bodies and the wounded and the disabled are required for experiments. And bottom left, we've got a battlefield casualty. This is artificial, although it's quite gruesome. But here we've got the Defence and National Rehabilitation Centre begging for public money because they are going to be using biomechanics and regenerative medicine to help repair people. I get a very unpleasant sense from this organisation, Mike. I think this is experimenting on casualties. They want people missing limbs, essentially, so that they can help experiment with these biomechanics. And the government, which of course has been throwing millions and billions away, we'll just give an example of Cameron here talking to his moneyed mates, but no money in government, so the public is expected to pay to help, in an emotive sense, these casualties. It's pretty cynical stuff.
Yeah. Equally bad, perhaps, is this. So the Ministry of Defence has announced contracts of £167 million to upgrade RAF Marham here. And this is going to be the future home of the F-35, if it ever turns up. £167 million, which will mainly be given to British Aerospace, BAE Systems. And it's going to create apparently 300 jobs to allow for maintenance, training and logistics at this facility. 167 million and 300 jobs, clearly not enough, I would have said, because as headline after headline have reported, the F-35 still basically does not work. It's all over the media, in fact. This is the Motley Fool saying how Lockheed Martin's grand plan for the F-35 fell apart. And of course, it's not just the media. So here is a report to the House Armed Services Committee in the United States, in which the The Director of Operational Test and Evaluation said that the F-35 remains immature, provides limited combat capability, and has many unsolved significant deficiencies. And unbelievably, also in this report, they're already starting to fight over future upgrades. They can't get it to work yet, but they're already fighting about how to manage a follow-on modernization effort for the 5th generation fighter jet.
I have to inject there, Mike. How can you possibly upgrade something which has not achieved a standard in the first place? If it doesn't work in the first place, you've got to fix the bugs before you can look at what you do to upgrade, haven't you?
Well, I think Microsoft has proved over the years that a slightly different strategy seems to work. But anyway, this seems to be the strategy you're taking. But we've got to rely on the British government, of course, to always tell the truth in these situations. So here's Michael Fallon. The F-35 is the most advanced combat aircraft in the world. Whether operating for land or our 2 aircraft carriers, they will ensure we have a formidable fighting force. And the Russians are just laughing.
Well, I'm sure they are, Mike. And of course, the carriers will never be operational until they've got operational aircraft, so they can be at sea. And the other thing that the government has done very effectively is they've destroyed all of the experience and training, so crews can't get carrier deck landing experience. So it's going to take years to build this up again. What the British government has done through Labour and Conservative is deliberately collapse the Royal Navy. They were told to do this in order to reduce the Royal Navy to a military power on par with other European countries to enable a balanced integration. We're hearing a lot about this coming from London. Finally, we think some of the British senior officers are waking up to the reality. Some, I understand, are quite shocked that they have never actually sat and thought about what the government's been telling them. But the British military is to be cut and cut again to allow this integration. One of the ways of achieving this is not necessarily by visible cuts of equipment, but policy, particularly on personnel, is very important. And the Mail here with an article which most people will take at face value, but it says Army fitness tests to be rewritten to make sure female soldiers can qualify for frontline duty. Well, let's put the reality in there. There it is. They're rewriting the fitness tests. And it's to make sure that women can qualify for frontline units once the rules are changed this year. Well, this is the reality. The reality is that they are going to weaken the British Armed Forces by doing this because they are going to reduce those principally fitness standards. And we know that women continue to be particularly badly bullied in the armed forces, which is causing major problem. The military do not want to talk about this. And of course, sexual relationships between ranks break down military discipline and undermine morale.
I mean, sorry, Brian, the word bullied doesn't really come close, does it? Because some of these women are
committed suicide.
Yeah, as a result.
Indeed. But since, of course, that British Armed Forces have approved Satanism for use in the army and on board Royal Navy warships, there's been a dramatic increase in bullying. Some of it just of mind-boggling standards, people returning and finding a carving knife through their mattress, for example. So this is very, very serious stuff. And of course, what is going on here is that the structure of the armed forces is being weakened. This is no fault of the women recruits. They are being used for particularly callous political purposes. And more is on its way because the interesting organisation Forces TV has announced that the MOD is to sell off 140 million pounds worth of land. This is 10 military sites, and it's being sold for 7,000 homes to help meet the government's target of 160,000 new homes by 2020. So some interesting questions there as to whether this land is accounted for. But don't worry, because our politicians have got all the answers. Here's Defence Minister Mark Lancaster. He reminds me of somebody, Mike, but I can't quite put my finger on it. It's to do with a programme on TV. Humorous, I have to say. But he says every pound we make by disposing of excess land will be reinvested into a defence budget that keeps Britain safe. I think he's lying.
Couldn't be, he works for the government. But let's move on to more serious subjects, because this from International Business Times: child sexting, Disney World and SeaWorld workers busted in Operation April's Fools, and this was in Florida, obviously. 2 men among 18 who were arrested in Florida. It was basically a sting operation where they were inviting them online. They thought they were speaking to 14-year-olds and so on, and they ended up getting arrested. But look, the point I wanted to make here is Disney and the amount of money that people spend on Disney products, going to Disney World and Disney theme parks and so on, because Disney has an absolute history of this and they've got a lot of questions to answer. For example, this headline: dozens of Disney World employees caught in sex stings since 2006. Now, that was published in 2014. And we've got another one from 2013 here: Disney worker arrested on child porn charges. We got another one here from 2006. Disney World employee arrested on child porn charges. Another one from 2005, where the police in the United States released a photograph. Actually, the child in the photograph they believed was not affected by this, but nonetheless they were appealing for information because of the amount of child pornography online, which appeared to be coming from Disney World. And it has long been a rumor that a large proportion of the child pornography on the internet was staged or set up in, the photographs were taken, the videos were taken in hotel rooms at Disney facilities. So as I say, Disney has a lot of questions to answer, and I question anybody who contributes to their profits by taking their children to these theme parks until those questions are answered.
We can also say, Mike, there's some really excellent videos now on YouTube analysing what is actually shown in the graphics of Disney films, and what the analysis shows is gross sexualisation of children.
In the meantime, here we are. A cancer drug this is part of the normalization of paedophilia, really. A cancer drug could stop paedophile urges, apparently. And the Times here reporting that men who fear that they may be paedophiles are being given a prostate cancer drug in the hope that it will prevent them from sexually abusing children. Now, here's the kicker, because halfway down this article it says that some studies suggest that 1 man in 5 shows some physical signs of arousal when they're shown sexualized images of children. And of course, these are sexualized images of children, making children look like adults. So this is not representative of reality in a sense. So this is an attempt to normalize and say that 20% of males are interested in young children, which is not the case. But you have another update on this?
Well, quite independently of you, Mike, I picked up on this article, no pun, from The Independent, but it says paedophilia, sexual orientation, like being straight or gay. And an expert, paper's all very good at talking about these experts. They never look into who they are or who pays them. But this expert says, I believe paedophilic disorder is a sexual orientation with individuals that are attracted to child features. In other words, an individual with paedophilia has the same ingrained attraction that a heterosexual female may feel towards a male, or a homosexual feels towards their same agenda. Now, I put a tweet out about this morning. In it, I said, here it comes, and as UK Column predicted, the start of normalisation of paedophilia. And what I think is going on here is that the gay community is absolutely being used as a stepping stone by the government in order to normalise paedophilia. So this is the very cynical use of people in order to get in the real agenda, which is to make paedophilia normal and acceptable. And this, of course, I'll say in my opinion, is the reason that we are seeing the government working so hard to protect child abuse rings around Parliament, and of course those abuse rings including members of Parliament, but also senior judges and police officers, for example. So this is where they're heading, Mike. In their vision of the new world order, it's to be quite normal for people to have sexual relations with children. if you're wondering how to stop it, of course, it's beholden on all of us, and particularly parents, to absolutely stand up and say, not in our name. I was just going to say the next subject appears to be common purpose related, and we'll just remind people it was the political charity Common Purpose that has been running courses in schools and colleges without CRB checks, but apparently they are immune from those sorts of constraints that the rest of us face.
Yes, indeed. So this is CSC Leaders and Common Purpose Organisation, and CSC Leaders are meeting next week for their latest get-together. Now, this is the Commonwealth Organisation, and of course, if you're going to set up a world government, what is the best way to do it, or global governance, however you want to put it? Is it through the United Nations, or is it through the Commonwealth? In fact, and this is a question that we've been asking for a number of years. Just to remind you, CSC Leaders, they bring 100 of the most, what they call exceptional individuals from around the Commonwealth, with the purpose of tackling challenges in business, government and society. And in this case, they're, of course, focusing on cities, on the cities agenda. And they are going to start with Manchester and Glasgow and get them working together a lot better. And with a view to producing a step change in how the public, private and not-for-profit sectors work together. So we're going to merge these three types of organisations into one big mush.
Nobody elected. These are all selected, appointed people, of course, Mike. They're talking about the leaders.
Yes. Now, if you want to know more about CSC Leaders, have a look at this article on the UK column, Multiple Paths Lead to World Government, by Martin Edwards. And why is Prince Philip on there? Well, of course, this has come out of the Duke of Edinburgh's Commonwealth Study Conferences. That's what the CSC stands for. And it represents a partnership between the Duke of Edinburgh's Commonwealth Study Conferences and Common Purpose. That's what CSC Leaders is. And just while we're on the subject, also have a look at all the articles in the One World Governance series. Not all by Martin Edwards, but many of them. And you get an idea of where this is going.
It's been encouraging over the last few days to see that people have been tweeting out about the impact of common purpose inside the NHS. And that was another excellent article by Martin Edwards, Towards a Million Change Agents. And that was a detailed analysis and exposure about the number of cells that Common Purpose has put into NH hospitals, training organisations. But we are now seeing doctors and other trained medical professionals starting to look in the direction of Common Purpose as the source for the troubles inside the NHS. So the change in management style to an aggressive, bullying, dictatorial style has been very noticeable. And of course, this is where you have chief executives, for example, on massive pay scales, 190, 200,000 pounds a year, simply dictating what's going to happen in the hospital. And I believe one of the individuals who is now talking about the Towards a Million Change Agents was the lady doctor. I'm afraid I can't remember her name at the moment, but she was the initial whistleblower for the deaths in Staffordshire hospitals. So it's quite encouraging, Mike, to see some of those excellent articles that Mr. Edwards did is now coming into the public domain. Well, where does the leadership route go to? It leads straight to big society. And thank you again for this. It was sent in to us as the Daily Record saying that in Scotland, the police are now going to be embedded into hospitals. And apparently that is to, here we are, it's to make our communities safer, make ourselves more accessible to more people, and provide an efficient, visible police presence at each of these busy locations. So Police Scotland, the police force unable to investigate paedophilia, is going to put itself into hospitals to work in partnership with the NHS. Of course, presumably they'll be able to help shut down wards so that if members of the public see anything untowards, they'll be able to get those wards locked, and the police will be able to eject the concerned members of the public from the hospitals. If you think I'm joking, I'm not, because along with this, we're now seeing coroners' offices being embedded inside local hospitals. And since a lot of the coroner's staff are ex-police, we're now seeing a total abandonment of any form of separation of the powers. So people can be Liverpool care pathwayed out in the hospitals, and if you're a relative and you try to seek information as to what has actually happened, you're going to come up against a stone wall, press too hard, and the police will eject you. It's big society with a vengeance, Mike, and we don't have to talk about any theory because it's all in the national papers at the moment if people simply start to join the dots. A very serious news today, that's the state of the country. If you're feeling, but what can we do? The immediate answer is to speak out, tell other people, point them in the direction of what you know, help them to wake up. And beyond that is to continue to challenge everybody you can who is in any position of authority. It doesn't matter whether they're local councillors or your local police or doctors. All of these people need to be educated that at the moment Britain is sleepwalking into a dictatorship, and with a remain in the EU vote, which David Cameron is desperate to achieve, things following that June vote are likely to accelerate very quickly. It can be stopped, but it's up to all of us to do something. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.